Welcome to the Explainer. Sometimes the most complex medical cases aren't about finding a single rare disease. They're about untangling this web of common problems that have just spiraled out of control. Today, we're going to dive into a real-life geriatric detective story. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the mystery of a patient's sudden, scary decline. Then we'll look at the specialized tools the doctors use to investigate it. We'll reveal the shocking clues they found, see how the team built a plan to fix things, and wrap up with what this one case tells us about the future of elder care.
All right, let's jump right in. This whole story kicks off not with some fancy lab result, but with a simple, worried observation from a family member. And that's what starts the whole investigation.
This right here, this was the first clue. Mrs. Chen's son could just tell she wasn't herself. She seemed off, confused, and she was getting weaker every single day. He knew something was deeply wrong, even if he couldn't put a medical name on it. So, let's actually meet the person at the very heart of this mystery. This is Mrs. Chen. She's 82, she used to be a seamstress and a farmer, and she very recently lost her husband. She was already living with a caregiver when this sudden weakness and loss of appetite really took hold.
Now, to say her health was complex, well, that's a massive understatement. With more than 15 pre-existing conditions, her body was already in this really fragile balance. So this wasn't a case of a healthy person who suddenly got sick. It was a frail person whose whole delicate system was starting to crash.
So when the medical team did a quick calculation of her overall risk, using a pretty standard tool, this is the number they got: 5. Now, on its own, 5 might not sound like much, right? But in the medical world, a number like this is a major, major red flag. Yeah, this number comes from something called the Charlson Comorbidity Index, and a score of 5 or more is basically a 5-alarm fire. It was a signal to the whole team that she was in an incredibly dangerous spot, with a really high risk of getting much worse, or even dying while in the hospital.
So to figure out what was pushing Mrs. Chen over the edge, the team knew they couldn't just rely on the usual blood tests and scans. They needed a more holistic tool, one that's designed specifically for the unique complexities of older patients.
And that's where the Comprehensive Geriatric Assessment, or CGA, comes in. You should think of this less like a test and more like a full-on 360-degree investigation. It's not just looking at diseases, it's looking at the whole person, their physical abilities, their mental state, their nutrition, even their social situation, to find all the clues, wherever they might be hiding.
Okay, so what did this deep dive investigation actually turn up? Well, the assessment immediately started to paint a picture, not of a single problem, but of a system in total collapse.
This chart, this really gets to the heart of it. It shows her ability to do basic things, activities of daily living, like dressing herself or eating. She went from being pretty independent at a score of 8, all the way down to severely dependent at just 3. This wasn't a small dip. This was a catastrophic collapse in her ability to just get through the day.
And the CGA just kept uncovering this whole cascade of problems. She was at a super high risk of falling. She was clearly malnourished. She was actually choking when she tried to eat. Her grip strength was incredibly low. And, this is crucial, she was diagnosed with delirium. That's an acute but reversible state of confusion that totally explained her son's observation that her response was getting worse.
So with all these clues pointing to a systemic breakdown, the detectives turn their attention to the #1 suspect in so many geriatric cases, and it's something that was hiding in plain sight: her medication list.
19. Let that sink in for a second. That's how many different medications Mrs. Chen was taking when she showed up at the hospital. 19 different drugs, probably prescribed by different doctors for different things, all swirling around and interacting inside her frail, 82-year-old body.
This is where the team's pharmacist became an absolute hero. They went through that list and immediately flagged several drugs as potentially inappropriate. For instance, a bladder control drug like sulfasalin can actually make confusion worse. Clonazepam, a sedative, can build up in an older person's system, making them drowsy and way more likely to fall. These weren't cures. They were part of the problem. And it gets even worse. It wasn't just about the individual drugs. The analysis found multiple major interactions. When you combine sedatives like clonazepam and quetiapine, you dramatically increase drowsiness and confusion. Or mixing quetiapine and sulfasalin, that could trigger dangerous heart rhythm problems. Her body was dealing with a full-on chemical traffic pileup.
Okay, so, mystery solved. The decline wasn't from some new disease, but from this perfect storm of her body breaking down, malnutrition, and a toxic cocktail of medications. So now the team had to build a plan to reverse all that damage.
Right away, the team jumped on her physical weakness. They brought in a rehab specialist, and physical therapy started right there at her bedside. And notice this, they're already planning for her discharge. The goal wasn't just to get her stable in the hospital, but to get her on a path to real recovery.
To fix the nutritional issues, another expert joined the team, a speech therapist. They tackled the immediate danger of choking with special exercises and designed a diet that was not only safer for her to swallow, but was also custom-made for her kidney disease. The goal was simple: make every bite count and make it safe. And here it is. This might be the single most critical intervention of all. The team started a process called de-prescribing. That long-acting sedative, clonazepam, a huge cause of her confusion, stopped immediately. Other inappropriate drugs were then systematically and carefully reduced. They weren't adding more pills, they were taking them away.
Mrs. Chen's story is so much more than just one successful case. It's a really powerful lesson in how we ought to be approaching the health of our aging population.
When you put it all together, the takeaways are just crystal clear. We have to treat the whole person, not a list of diseases. We need to use these powerful tools like the CGA and be really careful about the hidden danger of taking too many meds. But probably the biggest lesson of all is that modern elder care has to be a team sport, with everyone on that team focused on one thing: the patient's quality of life.
The detailed, coordinated, team-based care that Mrs. Chen received literally pulled her back from a terrifying downward spiral. It shows us exactly what excellent geriatric medicine looks like. And that leaves us with one final, very pressing question. How do we build a healthcare system where this isn't the exception, but the absolute standard for all of our elders?